we gotta do this again. Bradley had a thing.
Oh, it's all good.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, October 5th, 2023. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Vincent Bevins, author of If We Burn, The Mass Protest Decade and the Missing Revolution. And later in the show, Brian Concannon, executive director of the Institute for Justice and Democracy in Haiti, on the UN deploying troops to Haiti. Meanwhile, the fight for the speakership is on, baby. Steve Calise, aka David Duke without the baggage, versus Jim Jordan, aka the sexual assault cover-up guy, versus Donald Trump himself. I can do both. Meanwhile, it appears that the Sith Lord Steve Bannon was the man pushing Gates to oust McCarthy. 75,000 Kaiser Permanente workers walked off the job yesterday, the largest healthcare strike in U.S. history. Biden's border hawkishness persists. He's waived 26 federal laws despite deep environmental concerns to greenlight border wall construction in South Texas. 11 Code Pink activists arrested in Bernie Sanders' office yesterday, protesting his support for funding Ukrainian defense. Seems a little misplaced. FDA approves new Novavax vaccine targeting the latest COVID variant. Hey, so how did Bob Menendez's wife get away with killing a pedestrian with her car in 2018? More questions in the corruption and bribery case against the pair. Biden cancels another $9 billion in student debt for 125,000 borrowers, many of whom either work in public service or have disabilities. The New York Times reports that Rudy Giuliani has a severe alcohol problem. No. A Russian rocket strike killed 51 civilians in a cafe in eastern Ukraine earlier today, one of the deadliest attacks in months. George Santos's former campaign treasurer expected to plead guilty today to an unspecified felony. And lastly, Alabama finally concedes after trying twice to get the Supreme Court to allow for suppression of the black vote. A second majority black district will finally be drawn. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome to the show, everybody. It's an EmMajority Report Thursday. It is also just myself and Matt in today. So if you caught the live show and there was like a little bit of mute audio for a bit, it's because Matt is doing two jobs.
He was going to have Emma do it a cappella.
Yep. Bradley is... we kind of had to do that during the Zoom era, right? Because the sound mixing was so off.
Oh, it was a fun time.
Oh my God. Bradley is away on his bachelor party. I mean, I don't know if he's going to come back in one piece. We shall see. But he'll be out until Tuesday. Let's start.
Hello.
What? Do it again?
Hello.
Okay, I don't even know that one.
It's Dennis Prager.
Oh, there we go. Hello. Let's start here. We covered the speakership fight at length yesterday, so now it's time for us to focus on labor here, which is really, again, one of the biggest stories of the year. 75,000 healthcare workers at Kaiser Permanente in Colorado, California, Washington, Oregon, Washington, D.C., and I believe Virginia have launched a planned 3-day strike. They did it started it yesterday. Today is day 2. It is the largest ever labor action in the healthcare sector, and in the United States, I should say. Given the fact that our healthcare system is so heavily privatized here in comparison to other countries, it just, I think, accentuates some of what our most essential workers are going through. They were called essential workers. We clap for them. Bang pots and pans in New York City. Yeah. Oh. More
on that in a little bit.
Yep. Matt's confused on the microphones. We're figuring it out on the fly, guys. But the workers that are striking here are basically technicians, in many cases, nursing assistants, vocational nurses, pharma techs, assistants, people who are on the front lines, but who do not get paid in the way, say, a surgeon would or a doctor would. And as I said, they were called essential, but they were not treated as such. Here's some footage of Kaiser Permanente workers walking out this morning in Anaheim, California. You love to see it. You love to see the cheering and the solidarity there. The banging of whatever, the drums or whatever people were banging, but this time to actually treat our workers as essential. More Perfect Union, which is just, an organization that has been so important in recent years, or since it started. I believe it started. Some former Bernie Sanders staffers were a part of founding More Perfect Union, and they've just been on the ground covering all these labor actions. I don't think that you can talk about the explosion in labor action without, the fact that some of these labor reporters actually covering things in the correct way. I saw Alex Press got a shout out from Chris Hayes on late night TV on Seth Meyers. That's commend all of these reporters for actually doing their jobs as opposed to the New York Times and things like that.
Like this sort of online media space gets fetishized by so much, like by Silicon Valley people, but this is actually like what we need in this space, because like labor reporters have been cut. There's like, does any paper
right any major
desk?
Exactly.
They send their like intern that like had just been covering like congressional politics out to see like, oh, which way is what does this mean for Trump? And so like to have the like More Perfect Union and groups like this, it's really vital. Yeah,
and they're speaking here to Shauna White, who is a cardiac monitor tech at Kaiser Permanente, about her experience.
This is amazing, and this isn't just for us, this is for other hospital workers, other people that they claimed were heroes, and that they said, we were going above and beyond, and we were, what was the term that they gave us for COVID? Frontline workers.
Essential workers.
Yeah, essential workers. And all of a sudden, that's all forgotten now. Now it's just like, no, we can't give you an increase. No, even though it shows, we can see on the internet how much they've made and profited. No, you don't deserve any of that. So that's what's really upsetting.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Well, there's a couple things interesting there. One is like they talked about the recognition of essential workers, and you called us this. And what we even said at the time is like, this system is designed to go above and beyond on the recognition part of things and not the compensation part of things. We'll give you all the we recognize you, but are we going to compensate you? Are we going to give you like equity in the system? Are we going to make sure that you can afford vacations and go like have sick days and stuff like that? Like We'll just stick with giving you like employee of the month during the pandemic or something like that.
And that's why it was, I mean, I think maybe I know I was accused by people, I was talking to like my family about the clapping and stuff, and I found it to be ridiculous because it's just almost condescending.
Exactly.
I mean, of course, it was incredible what these workers were doing in the middle of a deadly pandemic, but that recognition is so empty and performative, right, without any kind of compensation element.
It was incredible, even without us, clapping out the windows, and it would have been even more incredible if we compensated them for that instead of just made ourselves feel good once a day by opening the windows.
And you can really tie or draw a line, I should say, to what the UAW workers are going through as well, in the sense that they were taken advantage of by the corporation that they worked for in a crisis, which was the 2008 financial collapse, where they were asked to give away their cost of living adjustment, which is the number one thing that allows them to get raises. And as cost of living increases, they get more money. It's one of the biggest drivers in why their wages are so depressed, because the executives, the corporate board said, hey, we're going under and we need you to take a haircut because we're taking haircuts too. And don't worry, we will return COLA, cost of living adjustment, once things get back to normal. And then with these workers, hey, we need you to go into the front lines of this deadly pandemic. We need you without proper PPP or PPE, right?
Yep.
But yeah, equipment's the last word there. Without proper PPE, you need to go in and do what you need to do, and we will clap for you. But now it's
right.
4 years later, or 3.5 years later, and they need raises, and it's like, you got to strike for that.
You see the structural veil that allows capitalism to work like this, because they say oh, we all need to tighten our belts, things are good. Well, can I actually look at that? Can I look at those numbers, or do I just have to take your word for it?
Yeah.
And then are you for sure going to get back to me when it's not time to tighten our belts, when it's time to loosen our belts a little bit, or are we going to have to shut this down and force you to? Because that's actually, surprise, what's happened.
So if you hear all this whining and bitching about how the fact that people aren't going to be able to get their care because these workers are walking out, and because this is why they have to hire scabs, which is already happening, by the way,
right.
Then understand that's not supporting workers in their fight now when they walk out is,
you never will.
That means that if you clapped in the pandemic, that you have no understanding of what people actually go through, because the only way that workers are able to get what they deserve from these major companies like this, and Kaiser Permanente is a behemoth, is to exercise their leverage. No recognition, compensation, and that's what's necessary here. So with that, I will say, we stand behind the Kaiser Permanente workers 100% here, and all workers who need to get what they deserve from management and from their corporate overlords. With that, we are going to take a quick break, and we'll be talking to Vincent Bevins in just a second. Be right back. We are back, and we are joined now by Vincent Bevins, a longtime journalist, author of If We Burn, The Mass Protest Decade and the Missing Revolution. Vincent, thank you so much for coming on today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So your book really looks at this central question, and it's expansive and ambitious in a way that I really appreciate. And it's an analysis of a decade of mass protest, right? Starting really with the Arab Spring and ending with COVID. Before we get into more of the specifics here, I'm just wondering if you could give people a sense of the time frame of that you wanted to analyze,
Right.
and really that central question, as I say, of with all these protests, why has there been such little structural change and or revolution?
Or indeed, the change we saw was often the wrong kind, or
Right.
certainly not what was asked for by the streets as much as we could understand what the streets were asking for. So yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. It is indeed ambitious. It seeks to be a history. It seeks really to try to tell the story of the last decade, 2010 to 2020. So I go from January 1st, 2010 to January 1st, 2020, and it is global in scope. So that is perhaps at first glance like wildly ambitious, far too ambitious, but it is delimited by essential concern, right? Like any work of history, it chooses to build the story around a set of things that are considered important for the reader now. And that main question is, how is it possible that so many mass protests led to the opposite of what they asked for? Now, not every episode that I analyze in the book ends this way, but far more in this way than anybody would have expected back in 2010. And it is really kind of a conundrum that overturns a lot of the assumptions that we had about revolution and indeed political resistance of any kind 10, 15 years ago. And so I think that it is possible, I hope that it is possible to do so, to tell the story of that decade as if the thing that really powered history in those 10 years is mass protests of a certain type that got far larger than they were expected to by the original organizers or participants, and that really changed the course of history in many countries, and I think indeed the global system. So it attempts to put all of that at the center of a history of the last decade that hopefully readers can come to, not only to understand what happened, like what happened in the so-called Arab Spring, what happened between Brazil and Hong Kong and Ukraine from 2013 to 2014, but to speak to concerns that really matter to people that will be trying to change the world in the future.
Well, let's start with Brazil, because that's how you start your book, right? I mean, and talking about your experiences there in 2013, how you were both attacked by military police, and then, how that protest movement on the ground just began to morph into something that wasn't really representative of the goals that were delineated in the outset. Talk a bit about your experience and how how everything began to shift.
Yeah, absolutely. Brazil is kind of the central narrative of this book, even though it's just one of many episodes analyzed, because I lived through it. So I put myself in that story to the extent that I am in it, just because I was so close to what happened, as you mentioned. At the beginning of a particular set of protests in June 2013, a small set of leftists and anarchists were agitating for a reduction in the price of the bus fare. Now, the first set of protests succeeded in making noise, succeeding in shutting down parts of the city. But like the dominant forces in Brazilian society, the media, eventually came to the conclusion that we need to crack down on these kids. This needs to be taken care of. Basically asking for the military police. Now, the police in Brazil are military police as a legacy of the US-backed dictatorship, basically asking for the military police to crack down. Now, on June 13th, and this is the moment that I'm hit, though the fact that other journalists are hit even more severely really changes the story moving forwards. The military police do crack down. They crack down so forcefully that it shocks mainstream media, the major voices in the country, into entirely changing the way that they view the protests. They go from saying these are punks and anarchists that we need to sweep off the streets immediately to, no, indeed, this is a uprising, a patriotic demonstration of the right of Brazilians to express themselves in the streets. And as millions of people pour into the streets, this new interpretation delivered by the Brazilian media leads people to believe that the protests are about something other than what the original protesters would have thought it was about. These two groups, very broadly speaking, the original leftists, punks and anarchists, come often into like violent conflict with the new arrivals. And then a week later, after this initial crackdown that I outlined on June 13th, I witness what we would now consider the beginning of the far-right movement in Brazil, but it didn't exist. No one even imagined that could have ever happened in 2013. people like that, people acting in the ways that we would now recognize that Bolsonaristas act and dress, supporters of far-right President Jair Bolsonaro, actually expelling the original leftists and punks from the streets, actually throwing them out and saying, no, it's not about your little left-wing parties and your cute little social democratic or anarchist dreams. It's about what we say it's about. And the original organizers had planned on this getting they hoped for it to explode, but it exploded in a way that they had never expected. And the explosion did not work out well for them. They were horrified often by the direction that it took. And long story short, a lot of elements are born in this sort of pressure cooker of June 2013 that find ways to take advantage of political opportunities in that moment and later in the next years in Brazil. Ultimately removing a democratically elected president, ultimately supporting a corrupt anti-corruption campaign that places Lula in jail. And ultimately, all of these elements come together to lead to probably the most extreme right-wing elected president on planet Earth taking office in 2019, or indeed the exact opposite of what it appeared that the streets were asking for back in the days of June 13 when I went out before getting tear gassed by the military police.
Is that a failure of militancy on the part of protesters? Is that a lack of political education on the differences between like anti-government sentiment and populism and breaking things versus that like breaking things, but with the understanding that it's to build up some sort of leftist government in its wake? Is that, part of the central issue that we often see, which is the splintering of certain kind of organized efforts to upend the system in ways that are a bit chaotic because it's not centered around traditional leftist, or as you talk a bit in the book about the old left, right? I mean, like what principles as opposed to just a general kind of animus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, intentional organizational forms with long-term strategy and real structure was something that would have been entirely natural to people that were trying to change the world in the first half of the 20th century. The Black civil rights organizations that were so heroic in the 50s and 60s and who indeed inspired so much of the new left would have taken for granted that you needed structure, organization, discipline, and long-term strategy. Now that sort of falls away, I think, for ideological and material reasons in the second half of the 20th century. Not only do people believe by the end of the 20th century that there's something sort of inherently problematic about that. Not everybody believes that, but these assumptions exist in wide enough spheres that this sort of ideological precondition exists for really the way that I think a lot of these mass process explosions are covered by people like me in the English-speaking media. And then also you sort of get the actual concrete material decimation of a lot of the organizations that were put together. By the end of the 20th century, the early 21st century, people are atomized, they're individualized. People are sort of, to the extent that they have a connection to the movement that they end up joining on the streets, it's that they all saw the same thing on the internet, and then they sort of find out on the streets who the other people are that are part of this movement. It comes together in a very in a way which is not really built by or conducive to proper collective action. And I think that an assumption was shared, again, especially in the English-speaking media, but across a lot of the world, especially the liberal North Atlantic world in the 90s and the 2000s, that if you sort of overthrew a bad thing, that something better was going to come along. Sort of deep belief in sort of the ideology of progress, this deep belief that the world was going towards something. This was the explicit thesis kind of Fukuyama's End of History book. Certainly a lot of people in the US government believed that the internet and internet-led uprisings would lead to things that were good for them. So, like, this was a major tenet of thinking in both the Democratic and Republican parties. Now, especially liberals, they tend to think the exact opposite, that like if the internet caused people to run into the streets that's maybe
Right.
something really problematic. That's actually maybe some foreign power that's ruining America rather than the universalization of the American dream. And I think that this tendency to view the explosion as something that was necessarily going to lead to something better taking its place was understandable to some extent. I mean, the particular ideological and organizational form of this one group in Brazil, they were explicitly horizontalists. So that meant that they didn't believe in leadership. They had no leaders. They rotated their members constantly. They rotated tasks. Everything should be decided by consensus. It's very understandable where all that comes from. It's very understandable why they believed that this would lead to the type of explosion that would be good for them. It just turned out not to be true, quite tragically. And this particular organizational form that works quite well for them for 8 years as a tight-knit group planning for their protests, left them both sort of ideologically and organizationally incapable of rising to the opportunity that was perhaps presented to them when the people rushed into the streets in June 2013. And this is kind of something we see across the decade, even though the cases are very, very different. This is another problem, is you see the sort of copying and pasting of tactics from one country to a very different country, where conditions are very different, or indeed after it's become clear that in the original country that the tactic didn't even work out that well. But what happened in Brazil, what happens in many places, is that when this explosion happens, this opportunity is, because the protest itself, especially the protest of this particular form, an apparently spontaneous, leaderless, horizontally organized, digitally coordinated protest, because this particular type of protest cannot take advantage of the opportunity, someone else does, and that's often a very cynical or powerful actor, existing elites, powerful economic forces in society, a foreign power that may use this as an excuse to launch the intervention that they've always been wanting to launch in this part of the world, but now there's a power vacuum, so they do it. And so I think you're right to point to both sort of some ideological assumptions, but also like the particular type of society that ended up discovering a clear desire to change the global system, but without the organizational structures required to take advantage of what comes from these explosions.
I'm struck by a lot of things that you say here. One is like, the fact that we'll talk obviously about the neoliberal word in a second and what that means for these kinds of protests, but it's also the exportation from the United States and then importation of general, I would say, attitudes towards that kind of regime change, which we have engaged in over the past century, and seeing how those kinds of that kind of thinking can be embedded in certain movements without necessarily there being the larger structural change element that's the ballast for these movements, but also how the limitations as well of anti-corruption politics, I guess, as it relates to Brazil and other countries, is fascinating to me, where it's more when you talk about how some of these movements were just about getting the bad guy out and not really necessarily having something in its place to build it back up. When you're dealing in anti-corruption politics, inherent in that thesis is that it's really just this cabinet, this leader that is corrupting the system, and we just got to get that guy out and put our guy in. Mm-hmm. And that is a very ideologically flimsy kind of way to go about revolution, because there is not the, I guess, necessary ideological underpinnings to make it more robust. I said a good amount there, but I'm curious what you think.
No, I think there's two really interesting points that you raise, especially in the Brazilian context. One, the guys that ended up running the anti-corruption campaign in Brazil did have an ideological project. It was not clear to everyone at first, but eventually it turns out these are far-right guys. These guys end up joining the Bolsonaro administration. So that's related to the other point that you bring up. So when, as happens very unexpectedly in June 2013, everybody, literally everybody, is invited to the streets for whatever whatever reason any individual wants to come to the streets for, whatever, and like literally everyone is offered an invitation to come to the streets and protest whatever it is that you want to protest. You end up sort of reproducing just the common sense that already exists in a given society. And often, I forget who says this, sort of somewhat dismissively, might be a bad guy, but don't get mad at me. The quote is still interesting, that the protests become against everything that's bad and for everything that's good. So anti-corruption is something that is like, so being against corruption is so obvious as to be meaningless, right? Because you have to start answering the questions that you started outlining, like, well, what particular type of anti-corruption practices are you going to employ? Because everyone's against corruption by definition. It's like being anti-crime. And like ironically, Sergio Moro, one of the main judges, the main judge in the now discredited Lava Jato campaign, he ended up trying to penning a anti-crime law when he came up in like the Bolsonaro government. Like all laws are anti-crime. Everyone's anti-corruption.
Right.
So when you make a movement about anti-corruption, that's something that everyone can kind of get behind, but that it does not answer the question of how this problem is going to be attacked in practice. And the Lava Jato task force, we now know, learning a lot from the United States before they started operating, in contact with the United States the entire time that they are on this crusade to ultimately put Lula in jail. What they're doing is they're breaking the law, and they're looking at one particular party more closely than they're looking at everybody else. And this becomes clear later, but at the moment, this is one of the various ideological strands that becomes quite powerful out of this sort of invitation to invite everybody onto the streets for whatever reason, because everyone's anti-corruption. But what specifically what does that mean?
Right, exactly. I mean, and I also quick pivot here, but you mentioned some of the technological elements earlier that influence, obviously, these protests. It's been, I think, a general thesis about, say, the Arab Spring, that the rise of social media and technology was a big part of that. But how do you, from your vantage point, assess the role of the United States' technology and technology in general, but with U.S. influence on some of these protest movements? Yeah,
I think it is right to point out that we didn't get the internet in the abstract. What we got shaping the built environment of social media, the experience of being online for the vast majority of the world's people, is US-based capitalist firms operating for profit. And I think that was not the only way that the internet could have taken shape. The fact that it took shape in that way rather than all of the ways that it could have taken shape has a lot to do with the disappointment and the ways that we all have lost our minds, I think, to some extent, from being on the internet all day long. When it comes to the beginning of this what I call the mass protest decade, starting in Tunisia in 2010 and then going to Egypt in the beginning of 2011 and the creation of the so-called Arab Spring, there was a lot of debate back then as to the role, well, especially U.S. English-speaking media were quite excited about the idea that social media had been a part of it, and that was seen as a necessarily good thing. Now, where I come down 10 years later is that for the type of particular mass protest explosion that I analyze, which is one that becomes so big that it either dislodges or fundamentally destabilizes a government, you can never have that particular kind of explosion without multiple causes. You need to have many, many things coming together. You need to have material conditions for the people. You need to have the right combination of different elements of society coming together. You need many, many things. But I think one of the things that gets you over the line, one of the things that makes them larger than expected in a way that ends up mattering, is social media. Now, that doesn't mean that it's about social media. And that also doesn't mean that the influence of social media is a good thing, because while it allows for the instantaneous transfer of sort of solidarity across borders, and while it allows for everybody to learn things immediately, social media ultimately, especially as the decade goes on, is used in ways that were not imagined. Like powerful forces can influence social media, which was sort of forgotten or not understood at the beginning of the decade. These for-profit capitalist firms driven by advertising revenue decide what we see based on what will be more likely to allow them to sell products to us, right? Like they choose to show us what will keep us glued to our phones so that other companies can advertise to us. And so, yes, I think that social media is one of the things that gets the initial so-called Arab Spring over the line, but that doesn't mean that it's about social media. If you asked people, I mean, most people were not online. Most people were more likely to be looking at television than Facebook in places like Tunisia and Egypt. More people were likely to be talking about economic justice than the things that often the global media imposed, like the things that the international media saw in the squares because that's what they wanted to see in the squares. So yeah, I think social media is a part, not the primary mover, and to the extent that it's a part, not necessarily a good for in ways that have positive consequences.
Well, and so how can you ensure then, as maybe a lesson going forward, that your protest movement isn't a replication of, like, say, capitalist interests from the perspective of the mediator or the not the mediator, the medium, right, on social media, versus something organic, because it leaves a lot of vulnerabilities, I would imagine, when methods of communication are so heavily influenced in the way that you accurately describe.
Yeah, and I think so. This book is primarily a work of history, and the work of history is built on 250 interviews that I did in 12 countries over 4 years. And these people, agreed to tell me their stories, often very difficult stories, so I could build this history. But the reason they did so, the reason they were willing to spend their time with me, the reason they were willing to go through often traumatic moments is because they believed that there was something to be learned from this, that the idea was to look forward and to take this very obvious desire to improve the global system and sort of match it with better tactics so that the next generation could learn from things that did work, because again, some things did work, and the things that did not work in the 2010s. And some of the things that become common across different national and political environments, apart from the very, very obvious lesson, you need to pay attention first and foremost to the ways that your condition is different than the other thing that you've seen. Pay very, very close attention to the ways that your system is constituted and act upon it in ways that will improve it without necessarily, it's amazing to be inspired by something that happens elsewhere. But as I said, there was a sort of copying and pasting of tactics that might have worked better there, or maybe would work here, but not exactly right now. So apart from the obvious lesson to pay very, very, very close attention to your particular configurations of power. Something that came up across many, many countries, well, there's a lot of things, but probably the easiest one to summarize is that people came to me and said, we wish we were more organized before the explosion. As a general rule for seeing who does the best in the wake of these unexpected mass protest events, it is the groups that are most organized before history comes knocking, that are most organized before the revolutionary moment in the streets, because trying to throw together an organization or coherent movement, or as organizers, no organizers is very hard. It takes a lot of hard work, and the people that did that hard work sort of in the off season, so to speak, beforehand, tended to do the best. And the types of organizations that people found to really work are the ones that allow for real collective action. So a truly democratic organization, but they can also act collectively and respond quickly to changing conditions with changing tactics, and indeed stay solid in the long term. And so this is something that is very common across movements that come together very quickly because of sort of a viral post or an inspiring thing on the internet. Often the structure does not remain after the initial animus dissipates.
That makes total sense. So based on your analysis, I think there was only one, my recollection, that you would say was successful, or you would define as having some success. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but if you don't mind telling a bit about that example, and what others can learn from it.
Yeah, so there's two. So the book ends with both Chile and Hong Kong, and Chile is a successful. Hong Kong, of course, ends in disaster for a lot of the original organizers. But also South Korea earlier in the decade is a success. The Candlelight Revolution does succeed in in removing a president very, very credibly accused of corruption. So in these two cases, some commonalities are that in both South Korea and Chile, you have labor action, you have union power that is able to put real pressure on elites in a given society at moments in which they can't really ignore, because depending on where you are and what you're doing, often elites can ignore people on the street. I mean, if they don't like the people, if they are not inclined to sympathize with people in the streets, they can wait it out often. But usually elites in a capitalist society do not put up with the reduction of profits, with a real hit to the economy. So in both South Korea and Chile, the importance of unions matter. And as I kind of tried to sketch out earlier, when these explosions occur unexpectedly, if they are incapable of speaking for themselves with one voice, if they're incapable of presenting a set of demands or a revolutionary project, or indeed taking power and forming a new state because of the particular nature of like an individualized protest, usually someone ends up speaking for them. So, there's the famous quote from the 18th Brumaire, like, those who cannot represent themselves will be represented. I kind of reformulated again here in this book to say those that cannot speak for themselves will be spoken for. So luckily, in the case of Chile in 2019, for example, Gabriel Boric and other people in the political establishment understand well enough what's going on in the streets to impose a solution upon this quite complex and cacophonous explosion, which is close enough to what a lot of people are out there for that it ends up dissipating the crowds, and then you get the long-term project to replace the Pinochet constitution with a new one. Now, that hasn't been successful yet. That's another history of the book. It takes a long time to build a better future. It's okay if everything is not resolved in the short term. But this generation that really came out of the 2011 protests in Chile now became the government. So Boric became the president of Chile. Camila Vallejo, one of the more recognizable figures from the 2011 protests, is a major figure in the government. And it was because the representation that this social explosion in Chile ended up getting from the people that were already in the establishment was close enough to what, even though a lot of people rejected this solution at the time, a lot of the people that were in the streets rejected the solution at the time. But in the long term, many of them came to the conclusion that this was close enough to what was being asked for, that it did set us on some kind of a long-term path for transformation of Chilean society, even if the Boric government stumbles, even if the constitution is not replaced in the first or second or third try. At least that generation took power, which is very different than what happened in places like Egypt, where you have a worse dictatorship than before, Brazil, the decimation of progressive forces, until finally the PT puts things back together and is able to win power democratically last year. So yeah, I think that's the some of the elements that emerge when looking at the victories. Some real elements of working class power that force elites to really pay attention, and then the representation that is ultimately provided is legitimate, as close to legitimate as possible, given the very strange and sort of illegible, very difficult to understand nature of these apparently spontaneous mass explosions.
Well, your book is very detailed, and for some of the other stories, I would really encourage people to check it out. Vincent Bevins, journalist, author of, you're also the author of The Jakarta Method, which I would recommend to anybody. And this book is called If We Burn, The Mass Protest Decade in the Missing Revolution. Really appreciate your time today. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I appreciate anyone that takes the time to read it. Hopefully, as you say, there's a lot in there, and hopefully if people come to it with their own experiences, hopefully that different people will find different things. I think there is a lot in this history, and we're just starting to understand what we can learn from it. So yeah, I thank you for your attention.
Yeah, we'll put a link to it in the description of wherever you're listening to or watching this, and at majority.fm. Thanks so much, Vincent.
Thank you.
All right, folks, quick break. And when we come back, we're going to be talking to Brian Concannon, Executive Director of the Institute for Justice and Democracy in Haiti, about developments in Haiti. Be right back. We are back, and we are joined now by Brian Concannon, Executive Director of the Institute for Justice and Democracy in Haiti. Brian has been on the show before talking about Haiti. I believe you were on here last time as well to discuss some of the tumult there. Brian, thank you so much for coming on today.
Well, thank you, Emma, for having me on Majority Report. It's always good to be with you.
Oh, always good to have you. Although the developments that we're seeing here, not ideal. The UN's Security Council has authored a mission to Haiti, which includes Kenyan troops, and this is clearly backed by the United States. Where are we at right now with that UN mission, if you don't mind catching our audience up to speed?
Sure. The quick update is that this week, the mission was approved by the Security Council. It's not going to be a UN mission. It's going to be run by Kenya. The UN knew that the mission would have to do things that the UN did not want to take blame for, especially shooting Black people in poor neighborhoods. And that problem of not wanting to be seen shooting Black people in poor neighborhoods has been the theme of the mission ever since it was proposed over a year ago. The United States, as you mentioned, is behind it. The United States wants it, but the administration does not want cell phone videos of white U.S. soldiers shooting Haitians on the internet. So it first reached out to Canada. Canada said it wouldn't take the job. So then it reached out to CARICOM countries in the Caribbean. They said it was a bad idea. Then Brazil, then countries in West Africa. And now finally, after a year, they finally gotten Kenya to join in. And it isn't because Kenya's long history with Haiti. Kenya has had full diplomatic relationships with Haiti for about 2 weeks. It's not because Kenyans and Haitians share the same language. They don't. It's really because the United States gave the Kenyan government enough money to be willing to do this dirty work.
That is a kind of terrifying situation then, because obviously this means that these troops, Kenyan troops, don't necessarily have the kind of oversight that you would want. And I know that previously there have been some human rights concerns about some of the Kenyan police forces here. If you don't mind talking a bit about that.
Sure. The Kenyan human rights groups are complaining that the Kenyan police are systematically attacking protesters and government dissidents. That's actually exactly what they're supposed to be doing in Haiti, or one of the things they're going to be doing in Haiti. And we know that because that's what happened last time. So this mission is being sent to prop up a corrupt, unpopular government in Haiti. The current government has not a single elected official in office. The same type of dynamic happened in 2004 when there was a coup d'etat and President Aristide was kidnapped. The U.S. brought in a UN force to prop up the resulting government and to protect it against popular cries for the return of democracy. And that mission was, shooting bullets. In one incident, 22,000 bullets were shot into a poor neighborhood in a single morning's operation. They also arrested political dissidents. They brought cholera to Haiti. They were involved in illegal arrests. And all of this, there was Haitian civil society and supporters in the United States. We tried to work the UN accountability mechanisms, and we actually were not highly successful, but apparently there is just too much accountability, even within the limited UN system for this mission. So they're making it a side mission that's just officially between Kenya and Haiti, which the idea is that it's going to be harder for Haitians to complain about human rights violations.
And how much of this is driven basically by the United States? I mean, you may answer this a little bit at the top, but exerting its pressure here on the Security Council and its influence as well, and basically allowing for U.S. interests to be protected by a force that is essentially kind of a hired mercenary group on behalf of U.S. What the U.S. wants to get done there.
That's exactly right. This is a hired guns to come in, and what they're supposed to be doing is to restrain Haitians' demands for democracy. The current government, it's often talked about as a mission that's there to fight gangs, except the problem is they're coming in to support a government that is broadly implicated in gang activity. Over 21 current or former members of the current ruling political party are under sanctions in Canada or the United States for corruption and drug trafficking and working with gangs. Human rights groups in Haiti, Harvard Law School, a host of other U.S. law schools have issued reports and statements documenting how the current government is involved in gangs, involved in corruption. And that is really who we're being sent to prop up. And, I'm saying this as someone, I was a UN volunteer in Haiti in the 1990s. I believe in the UN. I was a volunteer for President Biden's campaign because he vowed to put human rights at the center of his foreign policy. And it's deeply disappointing to me that we're at this crossroads with both the Biden administration and the UN really doing damaging things for Haiti. And it's of course infinitely more difficult for Haitians because they're going to bear the direct brunt of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think at least my opinion is if the Haitian people need some sort of support from the United States, foreign support in terms of aid, in terms of aiding in the democratic electoral process, which still has not happened, I am all for that. But that's not what this is based on my reading. And I guess we should go back in time slightly to talk a bit about how we got to this point. President Jovenel Moïse was assassinated around 2 years ago, and Ariel Henry is the current leader of Haiti, unelected, still in office, and democratic elections have not been held. How is that political environment underlying this entire situation?
Oh, it's completely underlying it. And to go back a little bit further, Henri and Moïse are part of governments run by the PHTK political party that's run Haiti since 2011. And the party has systematically dismantled Haiti's democracy. They've let parliament go without having elections, so there's no parliament. They've completely politicized the judiciary. They've politicized the police. They've politicized the entire public service while draining money from basic government functions in order to feed their corruption machine. And it's really to the United States shame that is who we are backing in Haiti. And there's a better way. Just last week, the National Haitian American Elected Officials Network, so this is all of the Haitian Americans who are serving public office in the United States, they sent a letter to Secretary of State Blinken. They warned him that this mission was going to make was going to turn Haiti's crisis into a catastrophic crisis. They pleaded with him to do a simple thing. So instead of a very expensive mission to send troops there, all they asked was that the U.S. stop propping up the current repressive government. They don't want U.S. to spend any money. They don't want them to do anything other than to stop propping up the government. Haitians are convinced that if the U.S. stopped propping up the government, that they could apply pressure to force the government to negotiate towards a transitional government and fair elections. If international troops are necessary, a transitional government can make that decision legitimately for the Haitian people. But right now, to send a force that's in support of a corrupt, repressive government is, as Haitians have said over and over again, a recipe for more disaster.
Additionally, because as you mentioned earlier, we have seen this happen before, and the violence that ensued and the cholera that was imported in, I mean, that it had devastating effects. And so the question here is why is the Biden administration continuing to support this unelected government? I understand that he's friendly and there is some sort of transactional relationship, but it's quite glaring, especially when, for example, I remember a few years ago, Biden had this summit on promoting democracy abroad, and I think he invited what was the opposition leader's name in Venezuela?
Juan Guaido.
Juan Guaido, right? Exactly there. So and that was obviously that's as silly as it gets, but But this is clearly a flies in the face of promoting democracy internationally.
Yeah, well, equally silly, at that same summit, they invited Haiti's unelected prime minister, Ariel Henry.
Oh.
So this is a clear Haiti is part of a double standard where the United States is making, and the Biden administration are making pronouncements of support for principles of democracy, but in practice, just completely ignoring them. And, in terms of why they're doing it, it's clearly not for the reasons they state. If you talk to members of the State Department, the answers they give are completely inconsistent with what's happening on the ground. And they'll talk about supporting democracy, but it's almost Orwellian to support democracy by continuing to prop up a government that won't hold elections and has not a single elected official in office. We've actually spoken with members of Congress. We've asked them, what's going on? What's the reason? And they say the same thing. They say that when they talk to the State Department, they do not get answers that make sense, that they're not consistent with the policy. What most people believe is that this is primarily driven by electoral politics, that the Biden administration wants to keep from being blamed for Haiti in a way that will hurt it electorally, so that right now, if the administration's not being blamed, and no matter how bad things get, the administration's not being blamed, and they're hoping that that's going to continue through the year, through the election next year. So as long as the current government is in place, no matter how repressive it is to Haitians, at least it's not affecting the Biden administration. But I think this changes. This is, as you mentioned, this is the U.S.'s mission, and I think the Biden administration is going to own this. And I think they are, even if it's not formally accountable, because they made it this strange mission where it's a non-UN mission. I think that the Biden administration is viewed in Haiti and increasingly is viewed in the United States as behind it. So they really own this.
Yeah, my first reaction was, how in the world could he believe that this would have any bearing on his 2024 election? But then you realize that it's all about the border. It's all about the influx of Haitian migrants coming into the United States seeking some sort of refuge. But my question would be to Blinken and to Biden is, how do you think that propping up an undemocratic regime that clearly is not doing much about gang violence in Haiti, how do you think that that's going to help some Haitian migrants remain in Haiti as opposed to coming into the United States and seeking asylum?
Yeah. The Haitians at the border today, and the Haitians that have come in through the different programs over the last couple of years, they were driven from their homes. Most of them want to stay in Haiti. They were driven from their homes by a combination of political persecution and economic persecution. As the government has stolen more money, it has wrecked the economy. Inflation's been over 20% for the last 3 years. There is wasting hunger among children in Haiti, which Haiti's never had. And all these things are driving people out of Haiti to seek, it's an absolutely horrible, perilous passage through the Darien Gap and through other places, to get to the U.S. border. Haitians only do it out of absolute desperation. And we are helping to create those conditions of absolute desperation by supporting this government. It's obviously a common sense move to allow democracy to come back. And it's not going to solve all of Haiti's problems immediately, but it is going to keep them from getting worse. And it's going to give Haitians hope for the future. I talk with Haitians almost every day on the phone, and people who've had hope for the future for the 30 years I've been working on Haiti. They're finding it harder and harder to believe that there is a way of Haiti to get out because the United States won't let it.
Well, Brian Concannon, Executive Director of the Institute for Justice and Democracy in Haiti, thank you so much for coming on and giving us this update. I'm sure we'll be in touch in the future, given the developments and the deployment of these Kenyan troops to Haiti. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much, Emma, for covering Haiti.
Really appreciate it. Thank you. All right, folks, with that, we are going to wrap up the first hour of this program, head into the fun half. We will take your calls. We will take your calls this time because every every Thursday except for last I Take Calls. I hope that's clear to people now. It's Sam who often doesn't take calls. It's me that almost always takes calls. I'm still really pissed about that I am last week.
A little bit,
I don't even know.
too sensitive, maybe.
Maybe a little bit. And it's like people can say horrible things to me or like, call me a bitch and things like that. But people saying I don't take calls.
Drive the show.
Yeah. Enough.
Call me a sellout or whatever, but like saying I don't program the show
correctly
generously enough.
Outrageous. On ESPN today, it'll be me solo. I'll do a little pre-recorded thing, but Bradley has sent me his picks. So I also have now overtaken him in our little competition because the dude went 0-3 last week. So time to really stick the knife in. YouTube.com/ESPN show.
I feel like I could go 0 for 3. I'm pretty sure I could, actually.
Well, I went 0-3 my first week, so I've been crawling out of that hole. But football is definitely the hardest sport to gauge what's going to happen and has the most variables. So only real sickos bet on the NFL. Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
What's happening on Left Reckoning? That's a good question. I wish I could remember immediately as I bring Binder in. What did we do on Left Reckoning? Why am I blanking? I have to look this up. Binder, how's it going?
Yeah, Binder, you go first.
Going good. I can tell you what happened on Doomed last night.
Hell yeah, do it.
Last night. On Doomed last night, we talked about how we all became zombies yesterday due to the emergency broadcast alert test. Because the alert activated the 5G nanochips inside of us that were given to us via the COVID vaccines. And we all became controlled by, I don't know, the government, I guess. And now we're. I
already was, so it's
right. Yeah, right. That's true.
Business as usual.
Now everyone's trans.
Right. But we talked about that, and fun part of yesterday's show was that at the last minute, I was able to arrange. There was this viral Reddit post about a Redditor said basically that their landlord was one of these conspiracy theorists who believed this. And because he believed in this conspiracy theory, he was going to shut down the power in his entire building for a number of hours yesterday to stop the zombification of everybody in the building. I had that Redditor on the show to talk about what happened and to break down his conspiracy theorist landlord, Gary. And he shared other text messages with us. This landlord is very clearly a QAnon believer. So it was a fun show. I don't know how to describe it. YouTube.com/Matt Binder, and it'll be up as a podcast at doomedcast.com very shortly.
All right. Matt, try number 2. What's happening on Left?
Yeah, I was trying to remember what frivolous dumb crap we talked about, but it turned out we did actual work. Tuesday night, we had Alice Sperry, journalist with The Intercept, talking about her piece, Enemies Within, look at violence faced by Ukrainians once Russia invaded, and then the difficulty of being accused of being collaborators as you try to achieve justice from the Russians post-invasion by the Ukrainian authorities. So patreon.com/Left Reckoning. Also in the post game, probably the last time this topic will ever come up, I think. I gave some forthright thoughts about Force the Vote and some of that stuff. So check that out. Patreon.com.
Oh, you finally jumping on board, Matt?
I think, Sam, we need to reconstitute the left. The irony is, I feel like the left's being reconstituted around, certain people are morons and need to be listened to less.
Yeah.
I feel like the reconstitution is happening. So
also, I can't stand the frickin' conflation of the left with podcasters or people like myself.
Sam shouldn't have told the National Nurses Union and DSA to look to not think that was the best idea ever. And that's why the left got destroyed.
R.I.P. to the left. Sam Seder stuck the knife in.
Our new shining star in the left, clearly, Matt Gaetz.
Oh yes, friend of all. At least for right now, I'll give him a fist bump or something for causing such chaos in the Republican Party.
I think
you're a little bit too old for him, Emma.
Probably
a little bit too old.
little bit. Actually, we have a clip on that very topic and some of the Republicans who are going to begin to use that against him in the fun half. The number is 646-257-3920. Brandon is not here quite yet. He will hopefully be joining us in the fun half. Although I know is moving soon, so maybe he is now, and I forgot about that. So again, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Anarchy. Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ Danner.
Yeah, or a couple of them, just put them in rotation.
DJ Danner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. You see white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males.
Psych. Fuck them.
Oh. Snowflake says what? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. All lives matter.
Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable